Last month, we had the pleasure of visiting Mindo, Ecuador for the first time to do some bird and wildlife photography, and many of you sent me emails and messages asking where did we stay exactly. So I decided to make this video talking about my 2 recommendations of where to stay if you want to stay in the Mindo area. Now, we did stay in 4 locations overall, and we wanted to stay as close to the town of Mindo as possible because we've heard so many great things about that area that we just really wanted to do it right and stay in a few different locations and get a feel for the place. So when I'm planning a birding trip, I pretty much know that I have 4 options. The first option is going on a photo tour. The second option is going on a guided tour, which is a little bit different because you don't always go to natural areas. Sometimes it's about some of the history of the location. The third option is going by myself, and the last option is doing a mix of both. So you can do part of the trip by yourself and you can do part of the trip with a guide or on a photo tour. Everybody has their own preference, but for this video I'm talking about if you wanted to go there on your own, because most of you that messaged me, that's what you want to do in Ecuador. And I think I have 2 really good recommendations that you can get a lot out of your trip. Even by just flying into Mindo and staying in that general area, you're going to have an awesome time. So I'm going to start going over the 4 locations we stayed at, and 2 of them I will just briefly go over because I don't think most of you would be interested in these locations. I know if I were to go back, I likely wouldn't go back to these 2 locations. Not that they were bad or anything, but just for what I wanted to do when I was in Ecuador. I wanted to do a lot of bird photography, I wanted to do a lot of hiking and trails, and these 2 don't really offer that, so I don't want to talk about them for too long. And then I'm going to get into my 2 recommendations, and both of them are very similar in terms of what they offer you and what type of species you can see, but they're both at very different price points, so depending your budget, you can lean in favor of either of them, and you'll likely have a very good time. I also spoke to a lot of locals and a lot of people just traveling around Ecuador, and I asked them for recommendations in the area. So at the end of the video, although I didn't stay at these places, a lot of people recommended them, so I'll put the names up and I'll put the prices per night that I'm seeing for, say, January or February, and you guys can get a better idea and look into them if you want to go there yourself. But those locations aren't necessarily around the Mindo area, so you are traveling a little bit further out. For the prices that I'm talking about, it's all in US dollars, and this is for end of October, beginning of November, and we were right at the end of their low season. If we booked a week or 2 later, it would have definitely gone up in price. So mess around with it if you can, because the price does fluctuate given their low and high season. So look into it. If you don't have a concrete date that you're going, you can definitely mess around with the dates and hopefully get a cheaper price. The first location that I want to talk about is El Descanso. And this location was the least expensive place that we went to while we were in Ecuador. It came out to $19 per person a night, and this included your own private bedroom, bathroom, and breakfast in the morning. And at this location, the staff was really nice, the food was great, the coffee was awesome. But the one negative thing, and that's one of the reasons that I'm not recommending it, is there's no trail system. So you have this beautiful gallery that a lot of people actually go to during the day to just watch hummingbirds. They have a ton of really productive hummingbird feeders, and they also have fruit feeders that attracts toucans and a lot of the tanagers. But that's pretty much all they have. And if you were to stay here for your whole trip, I think what would end up happening is you'd photograph everything that you'd need to in 3 or 4 days, and then you wouldn't have anything else to photograph. And that kind of leads into the second location, which is El Eden Treehouse. And this lodge, there's actually 2 locations you could stay at. You can stay in a cabin, or you can stay in the actual treehouse. And the treehouse is the reason we actually went to this location. My girlfriend and I have never slept in a treehouse overnight, so it was just one of those things that we saw it online and we're like, okay, we have to do this at least one night. So we went there, we stayed in the lodge, and we stayed in the treehouse. When we stayed in the cabins, it costed us $22 per person a night, and that included private bedroom, bathroom, and breakfast in the morning. And then when we stayed in the treehouse, that costed us $39 per person a night, and that included all the same stuff. The positive thing about this location is that it does offer you the option to order lunch and dinner. So if you wanted to do those and not go off of the property, you're able to actually do that, because at the other location that I just spoke of, you weren't able to buy any lunch or dinner at the location, so you'd have to go out and eat at a restaurant, and you don't really have a kitchenette or anything to make your own food, so you're pretty much limited to eating out. And at this location, that's actually where I filmed my 3rd Ecuador video, the wildlife photography one with the baby armadillo. It was at this location, so you do have a trail system there, but it's not that big, and especially when you're comparing it to the other 2 locations that I'll talk about. The main reason that I'm recommending this location over the last one is because you're actually able to go out onto a trail, even if it is a small one, and get some more species. So your potential to see more species is a little bit higher. And if you wanted to, you can go out and do night hikes at night. Night hikes at night? When else would you do night hikes? Not to be confused with night hikes during the day. But if you wanted to go out and photograph at night, you're able to go do that on these trails. So now I'll get into the 2 places that we stayed at that I have as my recommendations for Mindo, Ecuador. And the first one that I'm going to start with is actually my top recommendation, and it's the Yellow House Trails and Lodge. And this location is right in the town of Mindo, but it's actually off of a small road, so you're a little bit more isolated from the town. and they have a huge property with a big trail system. So if you decide to stay here, there's a couple options you can choose. The first one is having your own private room. So you'll have your bed, you'll have access to the trails, and that'll cost you $20 per night. And then if you want your own private bed and you want access to the trails and you want breakfast, that'll cost you $25 per night. But then if you do what we did, you can actually rent a full cabin. So you have this large 2-story cabin to yourself, and that costs $125 for the week. So that's $21 per night, and that gives you a large cabin to yourself. So on the first floor, you have your own kitchenette, so you can make all your own meals. You have a fridge, you have a dining area. And when you go up the stairs, you have a beautiful lookout looking over the town and some of the forest. And then you have your bedroom with your bathroom, your beds, and your shower. So we were 2, and this was more than enough room for us. And it was only $21 per night. And I'm on the site, and it looks like there's also an option to rent it for the month. So you can stay here for a full month and pay $390 for the month. So that's about $13 per night. And that's insane. Like, you can stay in Ecuador for a month and spend $390 on lodging. That's insane. You'd obviously have to pay for your own food and everything. And at the end, I'll kind of do a quick calculation for you of what you can pay. This is where I filmed my first 2 Ecuador videos. So if you haven't seen those, go and check them out so you get a better feel for the location. But the reason it's my top recommendation is it's one of those locations where as long as you're going out every day and you're putting in the hours, you're going to see new species every single day. If you go on eBird and you look at the hotspots in Mindo, Ecuador, this is actually one of the top hotspots in the area. So you know you have a high potential to see a lot of species. It's also inexpensive. So if you're a budget traveler, this is pretty much the place to go. I can't imagine a better experience in Ecuador for such a low price. So I highly recommend it. And another thing that's great about this location is that they only allow 10 people on their trail system at one time. So if you're a guest in the rooms or the cabins, you obviously have access to those trails, but they only allow a certain amount of people from the outside to come and use them as well. So for wildlife photographers and bird photographers, this is extremely beneficial because you don't have to worry about people constantly walking by you and scaring away some of the wildlife. So the best way to put it is that it's just a really peaceful experience. You get to just walk around the forest, focus on your photography, focus on the wildlife. And apparently in the jungles around their trail systems, there are spectacled bears. And I didn't know that before going. If I did, I probably would have stayed here longer. I would honestly stay an extra week just to try to get a photo or video of a spectacled bear. That's amazing. So I didn't know that beforehand. So if you're going, definitely look out for those because that would be an incredible photo opportunity. For myself, this location checked all the boxes. It's inexpensive, large trail system, and a lot of species. That's all I could possibly ever ask for when traveling. So that's why this location is my top recommendation. But on the other hand, I have a second recommendation, and this is pretty much just a fancier version of the Yellow House. This lodge is called El Supremo Paraiso, and it's right when you turn off the highway to get into Mindo. It's right in that location, and it's very similar to the Yellow House. It has a huge trail system, actually a very, very nice trail system. They also have a restaurant on site. They have swimming pools, hot tubs, yoga platforms, a chocolate shop where they make homemade chocolate products, which it's delicious. It's really good. But they really have everything that you need on the property, so you never have to leave. And I think if you're doing both bird and wildlife photography and you're mixing it with just a regular vacation where you want to relax, this is probably the place to go because it's a mix of both, and you're able to go on these long hikes if you want to, and then come back and go swimming at the end of the day or go in the hot tub, whatever. And what I'm seeing, the price varies quite a bit, but for kind of just a regular room that includes breakfast, it's about $50 to $70 US per night per person, which if you compare to the Yellow House, it is a lot more expensive, but at the same time, you're also getting a lot more out of the location. And the good thing about this location is you don't have to worry about cooking any of your meals or going into town to get food. You can literally just go there and focus on getting as many photos and seeing as many species as you can. If we were to redo this trip, knowing what we know now, I think we would have stayed at the Yellow House for 2 weeks probably. So that would have been $250 per person for 2 weeks. And then we would have stayed at this location for a week. So now I'll compare both budgets of if you wanted to stay at the Yellow House for 2 weeks or if you wanted to stay at El Supremo for 2 weeks. The first thing is the flight. And our flight from Montreal into the Quito airport was $415. So that fluctuates depending how early you're buying your ticket, where you're flying from, and what time of the year you're flying. For us, the flight was between $415 to about $600 for the time we were going at. So for you, it's going to be a little bit different. Then for transportation from the airport to Mindo, it's about a 2-hour drive, and that costs $75. Obviously, if you're more than one person in the taxi, that's divisible between the other people that you're with. So I think as a group collectively, it's probably best to bring around $200 because when you're in Mindo, you might want to take some quick taxis, which cost a couple bucks here and there. Next up on the budget is lodging. If you're staying at the Yellow House, it's $125 per week if you wanted to stay in those private cabins. So for 2 weeks, you're looking at $250 per person. And then what I did for El Supremo was, since the average was between $50 and $70 US per night per person, I just went right down the middle at $60 a night. So for 14 days, 13 nights, you're looking at $780 per person. And then in terms of food at the Yellow House, since you have your own kitchenette, I would suggest bringing $250 for 2 weeks. That's really fair, especially if you're hunkering down and just buying the basics that you need to eat. That'll be more than enough money, especially if you're splitting the groceries with somebody else. And then at El Septimo, you do have the restaurant, so if you want to eat lunch and supper at the restaurant, you are going to be paying a little bit more. So I said to bring around $350. Now, breakfast is included in your price with your stay. So honestly, what we were doing, we were just eating a big breakfast and then having maybe a snack or two in the middle of the afternoon so we didn't have to pay for lunch, and then just having a nice supper. And then lastly, I think it's just always great if you're traveling to bring a little bit of an emergency fund. So I put $100 for emergency. You probably won't need to use it, and you'll probably have extra left over from either your food or your transportation, but again, just good to have in case you need it. For 2 weeks, that brings our total to $1,215 for Yellow House and $1,845 for El Septimo. And honestly, those prices could definitely be lower if you're a little bit more modest with your food and you don't use your emergency fund. And that's why these two are my two recommendations. I think no matter which one you go with, you're going to get a lot out of your trip, especially if it's your first time in Ecuador. It's going to blow your mind. Like, there's just so many awesome species here. I'll put the link to these locations down below so you guys can check it out yourself. And here are the places that were suggested to us from locals and other travelers while we were there. So definitely look at them, compare them to the ones that I suggested. But honestly, it's just such an awesome country and you're going to have a great time no matter where you go. So hopefully you guys can experience this, and I hope this was helpful. Let me know down below if you have any other questions, like I said, and I'll see you in the next video. Happy birding.